Okay, so in our third video on writing across the curriculum, or WAC, let me take you on a journey into Isabel May's land of teaching. What you see here is one of the slides that I use for a video lecture with my students when we focus it on one module in our course on writing for scholarly journals. We'll focus on the IMRAD genre, right? Introduction, methods, results, discussion. And we focus one module on just the introduction section. So here are some tips and tricks, which is a synonym really for rhetorical moves for an effective introduction. So these are some examples, right, about what to think about as we're writing our introductions, or more importantly, probably revising our introduction drafts. I encourage students to just write down whatever they think needs to be on paper for a draft, and then really use these principles and rhetorical moves as they're revising. I think often writers feel, and I certainly felt for a long time, if I can't get it right the first time, why even bother? And that's of course ludicrous. We all know this as experienced writers and as published authors. Nothing is ever great the very first time. Maybe different for journalistic writers, right? But that's a very different genre. But in this genre of research writing, of a research manuscript, of a scientific paper, of a research article, different names all meaning pretty much the same. It takes a lot of finagling, a lot of deleting, rewriting, adding, taking out, cursing out whomever at any given point to get it really to the place where it's most effective. An old grad student of mine once described writing is like nailing a jello to the wall, right? It is really difficult. It's a very difficult and complex process that happens in our brains. Not a neuroscientist, so there's probably a much more sophisticated way to explain that. But I know from my own experience, I think faster than I write. And as I'm writing one thought, I'm already 3 thoughts ahead, which makes for really confusing passages at times. And so in our revision practice is then when these things become really important. And that's, I think, why I often find that in a lot of graduate level courses, we don't give students enough time and enough opportunities to revise based on quality feedback. So again, here is the slide for what, based on research on IMRAD articles, sort of a synthesis of some of the most important rhetorical moves, things to do and what not to do. And I always preface this that these are certain standards, but for each of these standards, you'll probably find a lot of examples that don't do the exact opposite, and there's still a really successful paper. So, right, those are guidelines rather than written in stone, and they change, which is, again, reason for us to be in conversation with our students about the changing nature of language, genres, writing, and so on, writing conventions. There we go. So here are some resources and activities that I use for my modular introduction sections. I've given you here access to some of my YouTube videos. Once you have the link, you can look at them. So they're a little bit shorter than videos I'm making for you. Trying not to go over 10 minutes, or 15 minutes at the most, but these ones I kept short. And so I take students to some of the major rhetorical moves and show lots of examples. And so I asked them to do this in the order here. So the handouts you won't be able to take a look at, but you'll see the videos. You can watch the videos if you like, or take a look at them. And then I have my students read these articles published in Clinical Chemistry by Thomas Ainsley. Oh, somehow this is not working. Okay. Upsala. Ah, there it is. It was a cold and rainy night. Set the scene with a good introduction. I might have included a link to 14 total of 14 sort of articles like this, and you see it's pretty short. It's 5 pages long. It's written for clinical chemistry, so it has clinical chemists in mind, folks in clinical chemistry in mind, but it is really accessible, and they're short and very to the point around what are important rhetorical moves and things to do in an introduction. Is to click through here. I find those articles great, so use them if you like them as well. So here's some resources, right, to just kind of give you an idea of, when I talk about rhetorical moves, the kind of materials I give my students as examples, and we do some work on those, on some of these texts also in hypotheses and hypothesis assignments and discussion sessions. I also have my students do this for the introduction section, a skeleton paragraph. And so you'll see students have to fill in, and I ask them to actually be creative. They can make up whatever topic they want to write about. I have students write about baseball, about cats, about, made up studies about cats versus dogs. I've read some really funny I call them pretend introductions. And so just to practice the rhetorical move and the rhythm of the introduction section, the general background, here's why it's important, this is what we don't know, and this is why our study fits in, right? It's a really kind of fun way to break up this always like, oh my God, I got to write a research paper or a research introduction or review a paper, but like have fun, be creative with it. We don't get to do that nearly as much, I think, as I'd like to. So and if you're interested in any of these in a hard copy, let me know. I'll be happy to share any of this material with you outside of what I've provided to you as well. So getting back to the comments, giving comments on students' papers. So part of that is part of the instruction on what are some good writing principles, some effective rhetorical moves and so on, what are some genre conventions. And then, of course, when we then review our students' work, what do we do? The reader's hat on is very important. Putting your reader's hat on is very important. Do not use language like awkward is not clear. And I put these here because I use these for a long time when I gave feedback to students. And awkward was my favorite phrase to use because people use it on my papers. And really, I have no idea what awkward is. So rather than just saying awkward, which is also a little bit of a value judgment, let's do something different. For example, as a reader, I am not sure I follow your logic here, or I'm not really sure I understand this, or reading this, I'm hearing you say, is that what you're communicating? You see the questions here. Are you trying to say this? That really opens up the channels of communication in a different way. This might mean that you can't comment on every single thing in a paper, which you shouldn't do anyways. I have a tendency to over-comment on students' papers. I always give more than feedback than I probably should. And there's a lot of research that supports being more judicious with feedback. So I'm still working on that myself. But when I give feedback, I try to use these types of phrases, right? So these are my stock phrases I use for a lot of feedback to students. I'm a big fan of providing passage-specific feedbacks in in-text comments, as well as what we call summative feedback at the beginning of the text. And I'll show you an example in just a second. Don't be afraid to comment on what is well, like, oh, I really like this. This makes it really come alive for me, whatever it is that you want to comment on. Or great topic sentence, it's a great transition into this new point, blah, 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 whatever. Don't be afraid to model meaning suggesting a rephrasing, especially as instructors. I'm more careful with this when we train our writing consultants in a writing center. But as an instructor, I feel comfortable at times to suggest a rephrase. Maybe once or twice where I really feel it might help the student. It's a little tricky because I don't want to speak for the student, but I do think that my students can really benefit from that. I certainly have when I have gotten feedback like that from previous graduate instructors of mine when I was in grad school. And I'll show you some of the work that you can go for some more feedback by Nancy Sommers. So we'll look at those at the very end. So here's an example of a student text. And just really, I want you to focus on the comment here that I make. As a reader, I expect to learn something about the efficacy around healthcare service for new refugees. Remember, you're not putting together a fact sheet with relevant information about this topic, presenting an argument. This comes from a class, an introductory course for writing and what is it called? Introduction to Library Resources and Scholarly Writing. I should know this. Of course, I've been teaching for years. I have trouble. It's not the title I came up with, so that's why I'm always having trouble with it. But the students often make the mistake in there or erroneously just present all the facts on a topic they choose. I'm like, well, what's the argument? What do we know? So your paper is about I'm trying to think of something about, preventing diabetes in women above the age 50. I don't need to, it's good to know how many women above 50 have diabetes and what's the prevalence in terms of race and region and blah, blah, blah. But what's the point? Is your point that you're making this paper that there's certain ways that you can treat diabetes in this group that have proven to be successful? So really switching them from that just regurgitating the information, which is important, right? Some paraphrasing, summarizing, to moving towards using the information to add something a little different, a little new to the discourse. Summative feedback, I use the track change. This is the one time I use track changes, actually. I use track changes. That's why you see the underlined here. It's a screenshot from a paper. So, I have a couple of points that I made throughout the paper, and I wanted to highlight one particular particular thing here. So in your introduction, make sure that you don't just jump from one topic to the next, but that you connect the different aspects you're writing about with each other. You write very well about the subject and obviously have great knowledge, right? The positive and passion for this topic. At times that can make connection between issues seem obvious, but they will not be obvious to folks that are familiar with the topic as you are. Shouldn't add it. So, and if you go back and read some more of this, it gives some very specific feedback on the student's paper. Modeling a transition. This is where I said, don't be afraid to model something. So I suggest here to move away from language like another aspect, and this is just because the students overuse this in the paper a lot. You could write something like this. In addition to discussing the benefits of nuclear power over alternative energies, Brooke et al. Also writes, it should be right, also write about nuclear power being safe. Otherwise, good job with the topic sentence. This is a part of the module where we discuss topic sentence and paragraph structures a lot. It's my introductory course, Science Communication Principles, in our program, the first course the students take. And so in my feedback in that paper, I really focus on the beginning of paragraphs. And often, and the students have watched some videos on topic sentences, read resources about it, did some hypothesis annotations and so on, and then they write their paper and I provide them feedback and they rewrite this paper as part of their portfolio at the end of the course. And so my feedback is very specific on topic sentence, and I find that students need often help with modeling that to really get it. And I have to say that by the time I get their revisions back, they rarely use the exact sentence I give them. And I didn't do this here, but I often say like, hey, here's just an example. And I might say, it's not the greatest writing ever produced, which usually it isn't. It probably never is. But you get the idea where I'm going with this, right? Just to help them think about, okay, how do I get from point A to point B, meaning paragraph A to paragraph B, without confusing the reader. And so here we come to the resources page, so you're almost done with me. The first one is, I mentioned this earlier, it's a special issue by the WAC Clearinghouse. I'll click on it so you see what it looks like. It was published in, what was the year on this? 2015. There might be some newer material out there if I can find it, but I haven't seen a specific issue on this. So there's some examples of some WAC initiatives like doctoral boot camps or doctoral programs. Thesis support for doctoral programs, very common WAC initiatives at different campuses. So some additional research and things to look at with some suggestions. Asao Inoue is a very well-known scholar in the world of anti-racist and equity-based writing assessment. He has a wonderful blog called Infrequent Words. I recommend it strongly just to read for an inspiration around really beautiful student-centered writing instruction. Bear in mind, Inoue really works mostly with undergraduate students, but a lot of his work can be really replicated in graduate level classrooms as well. I mentioned Nancy Sommers earlier, Resource 3. It's a little book, or actually this is an article responding to student writing. It's also a little book published by one of the big textbook publishers, blanking on it, on responding to student writing. It's based on a large Harvard-based study of undergraduate writing. They followed students for, I think, 4 years and compared the comments they received on their papers. Pretty extensive study, and came up with sort of suggestions and recommendations on how to respond to student writing. And it really comes from this perspective of the reader's perspective. Like, hey, as a reader, I'm struggling with, or I'm wondering about. Swales, I mentioned, resource number 4, genre analysis, a pretty standard text. You can find some of his articles online as well, but this is a good book if you're looking for some light reading. It is not written too inaccessibly, so it's actually could be considered sort of light reading. Christine Tardy's Beyond Convention Genre Innovation that I cited. Want to make sure I put this here. And then this is a podcast that is really beautiful, and it's won some awards, called Pedagogue, and it's focused on writing centered writing assessment pedagogy. So there's Asao Inoue is one of the people who has been interviewed before. So here you can see, and it links to his actual blog as well. So explore that if you have a chance and you have long commutes and you want to kind of listen up on some pedagogy. And the last piece I encourage you to take a look at, I don't know if it's a DUI, it's from 2010 by Rashawn Asante-Young, who is also one of the major scholars in anti-racist and equity-based writing assessment and WAC work, writing across the curriculum work, that is written in African American vernacular, AAVE, which is how Rashawn Asante-Young identifies as Black. And it's a very interesting piece advocating for why are we not using different types of Englishes? Why is it that there's only this one standard, white English, leading to white language supremacy? Why is this the only way that we can envision research being communicated? And it's a really provocative piece. And so if you want to dive into that, you have the resource here. And I believe I'll be talking with you at some point in your faculty meeting, and I'm looking extremely forward to it. And I will have more resources for you. And as I said, please contact me anytime. My email address is imay@umaryland.edu, and I'd love to work with all of you. Thanks.